In the twilight of Elizabethan England, ambition hung thick in the salty sea air. London, bustling with the clamour of merchants, sailors and nobles, pulsated with a relentless hunger for exploration and wealth. It was a time when whispers of distant shores, untold riches, and uncharted seas captivated the imagination of a nation eager to leave its mark upon the world. Queen Elizabeth I, the radiant yet fiercely determined monarch, held court amidst a realm buzzing with anticipation. Her advisers debated furiously over maps stretched across oak tables in dimly lit chambers, their fingers tracing the uncertain routes toward promise and peril alike. The threat of Spanish dominance loomed large, their empire sprawling across continents, and Elizabeth understood the strategic imperative of extending England's influence overseas. Into this fevered landscape stepped Richard Hakluyt, a young scholar from Oxford, with an unquenchable curiosity and an unwavering belief in England's maritime destiny. Tall, keen-eyed and passionate, Hakluyt was driven not merely by the promise of wealth, but by the noble ideal of knowledge and the prestige of his nation. Hakluyt frequented London's bustling docks, absorbing tales from returning sailors who spoke of storms and shipwrecks, encounters with foreign cultures, and riches that glistened tantalizingly just beyond reach. Each story stoked his resolve to document and preserve these adventures, transforming individual voyages into a collective narrative of national ambition. Elizabeth's court was enthralled by visions of expansion. Notable explorers like Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, and Martin Frobisher were elevated as heroes even before their ships left port. They embodied the boldness, resourcefulness, and resilience that the Crown aspired to project across the globe. Meanwhile, London's financiers, sensing opportunity, poured their fortunes into ships and provisions, fueling expeditions that promised returns of immeasurable bounty. Yet beneath this veneer of national pride lay stark realities. Shipyards worked tirelessly, craftsmen laboring under candlelight, constructing vessels designed to weather the harshest seas. Families bid farewell to loved ones, knowing the perils awaiting beyond familiar shores. The streets resonated with prayers and hopeful blessings as each expedition embarked upon its uncertain journey. The quest had indeed begun, a relentless drive toward the horizon, born out of necessity, ambition, and the indefatigable spirit of a nation on the cusp of greatness. Little did England know, the voyages that would soon unfold, meticulously documented by Hakluyt, would forever alter the course of history. Part 2. The Vision of Hakluyt. Amid the intellectual fervour of late 16th century Oxford, Richard Hakluyt stood apart, a scholar captivated not by ancient text alone, but by the fresh ink of explorers' logs and maritime charts. His modest study overflowed with stacks of manuscripts, hastily scrawled notes, and maps that told stories of adventure, peril, and promise. Candles flickered late into the night as he meticulously compiled the fragments of voyages that would shape England's maritime legacy. Hakluyt's vision was rooted in his childhood memories, tales told by his cousin, a seasoned traveller, who sparked his imagination with narratives of far-off lands. These early stories ignited within him a fervent belief that England's future hinged upon its ability to master the seas. He saw clearly that knowledge of distant territories was the currency of power, trade, and diplomatic influence. Driven by this conviction, Hakluyt sought the patronage of influential courtiers, articulating his ideas with eloquent passion. His arguments were compelling. England must assert itself on the world stage, not merely through conquest, but through exploration, commerce, and cultural exchange. Hakluyt envisioned an England transformed, where sailors, merchants and scholars collaborated to forge a national identity anchored in maritime prowess. His efforts bore fruit when Queen Elizabeth I herself took notice, intrigued by his meticulous compilation of voyages and keen understanding of geopolitical strategy. With royal approval, Hakluyt expanded his efforts, interviewing returning mariners, collecting detailed accounts, and drafting guidelines for future expeditions. The young scholar's work soon culminated in the groundbreaking compendium, Principal Voyages of the English Nation. More than a mere historical record, it was a manifesto urging England onward, a call to embrace its destiny upon the open sea. Hakluyt's vision crystallized into a national movement, inspiring generations of adventurers and explorers to cast off from familiar shores and chart the unknown. As his compilation circulated, its impact reverberated through English society. Naval captains studied its pages. Merchants calculated risks based upon its detailed accounts, and ordinary citizens marveled at the thrilling possibilities that lay just beyond the horizon. Richard Hakluyt, driven by curiosity, scholarly rigor, and patriotic zeal, had set England upon a new course. His vision of exploration and documentation established a foundation upon which England would build its maritime empire, profoundly altering the nation's destiny. Part 3. Sir Francis Drake, the Sea Dragon. The waves crashed furiously against the hull of the Golden Hind as Captain Sir Francis Drake, known among his crew as El Drake, the Dragon, steered resolutely toward the tempestuous horizon. His eyes, sharp and vigilant, scanned the boundless ocean, betraying a mix of caution and insatiable determination. Drake's very presence radiated a fiery defiance forged in countless battles against nature and man alike. Born of humble origins in Tavistock, Devon, Francis Drake rose swiftly through the naval ranks, propelled by skill, audacity, and an uncanny ability to inspire loyalty. Elizabeth herself favoured Drake for his fearless raids on Spanish galleons laden with gold and silver. Spain labelled him a pirate, but in England Drake was celebrated as a national hero, a warrior who dared challenge the mighty Spanish Empire at its height. Drake's most audacious venture began in December 1577, when he set sail from Plymouth on what would become England's first circumnavigation of the globe. Commanding a modest fleet, Drake navigated treacherous storms, debilitating scurvy, and mutinous whispers that tested his iron resolve. His leadership was unwavering, driven by an ambition that extended far beyond mere treasure. His voyage took him to distant, exotic lands, the lush coasts of South America, the desolate islands of the Pacific, and the vibrant ports of the Spice Islands. Each new land was fraught with peril, from hostile indigenous tribes to fierce Spanish resistance. Yet Drake navigated these dangers with extraordinary cunning and bravery. One defining encounter occurred off the coast of Chile, where Drake's fleet captured the Spanish treasure ship Nuestra Señora de la Concepción, laden with riches beyond imagination. The victory cemented Drake's reputation as England's greatest sea captain and dealt a severe blow to Spanish pride. The journey was far from over. Drake continued westward, becoming the first English captain to traverse the treacherous Strait of Magellan and sail into the vast Pacific. His ship battled storms that threatened to splinter the vessel, but Drake's determination held the crew together, guiding them safely through waters no Englishman had previously sailed. Upon returning to Plymouth nearly 3 years after departure, the Golden Hind bore riches unimaginable, enough to finance England's further maritime ambitions and elevate Drake to legendary status. Elizabeth knighted him aboard his vessel, an unprecedented honour symbolising England's maritime aspirations and defiance against Spanish dominance. Sir Francis Drake, the Sea Dragon, had changed the course of English history, proving to the world, and to England itself, that the seas held the promise of glory, wealth, and empire. His legacy, etched forever in the annals of exploration and adventure, continued to inspire future generations of English seafarers who dared to follow in his fearless wake. Part 4. Frobisher's Northern Obsession. In the frigid, unyielding waters of the North Atlantic, Martin Frobisher guided his small fleet into the biting wind, eyes fixed firmly upon the icy horizon. He was a sailor hardened by storms and disappointments, yet unrelenting in his quest for the fabled Northwest Passage, a sea route that would connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the treacherous Arctic expanse. Frobisher was a man possessed, driven not merely by the promise of wealth, but by the burning desire to carve his name into history. His voyages began in 1576, supported by Queen Elizabeth I and ambitious London merchants who dreamed of a quicker trade route to Asia's lucrative markets. The initial voyage was wrought with peril. Icebergs loomed menacingly, storms raged mercilessly, and the crew grappled with harsh conditions and dwindling morale. Upon his first sighting of Baffin Island, Frobisher felt triumph and hope surging through his veins, only to be swiftly overshadowed by hardships that followed. He returned home carrying mysterious black rocks, initially believed to hold gold, stirring excitement and investment in subsequent expeditions. Yet, the harsh northern climate and treacherous waters claimed lives and ships, testing the endurance of his crew to their limits. Frobisher's second and third voyages intensified his obsession. The Arctic conditions were merciless, demanding immense physical and mental fortitude. Frostbite gnawed at fingers, ships were trapped in shifting ice, and tensions flared among men pushed beyond exhaustion. Still, Frobisher pressed onward, guided by maps that held more hope than accuracy. Despite his relentless spirit, the glittering promise of gold proved to be mere illusion, the rocks worthless. The quest for the Northwest Passage, too, remained elusive. Disappointment echoed among his investors back in England, who saw their fortunes vanish in the northern chill. Yet Martin Frobisher's voyages were not in vain. His obsessive explorations provided invaluable knowledge of the Arctic terrain, charted previously unknown territories, and demonstrated the resilience and courage required for northern exploration. Though he never found the mythical passage or wealth he sought, Frobisher's adventures captured the English imagination, fueling further explorations and laying the groundwork for future maritime achievements. In the annals of exploration, Martin Frobisher stands as a figure of daring ambition and poignant tragedy, a sailor whose northern obsession highlighted both the dreams and stark realities of the Age of Discovery. Part 5. Raleigh and the Lost Colony. The shores of the New World shimmered under a relentless sun, a land of lush forests, rich soil, and unbounded promise. It was here, upon the rugged shores of Roanoke Island, that Sir Walter Raleigh sought to plant the seeds of England's first permanent colony. Tall, charismatic, and profoundly ambitious, Raleigh embodied Elizabethan England's dreams of empire, driven by a vision of a new society flourishing in distant lands. The first expedition in 1584 brought tales of fertile lands and hospitable natives back to England, igniting widespread excitement and investment. Encouraged by Queen Elizabeth I, who saw colonies as vital outposts in the rivalry against Spain, Raleigh orchestrated a grander expedition in 1585. settlers arrived eager and hopeful, but soon faced stark realities: scarce provisions, uncertain relationships with indigenous tribes, and unfamiliar diseases. Under the leadership of Ralph Lane, the colonists initially explored and mapped the region, but survival quickly became precarious. Tensions grew with local tribes, culminating in conflict and mistrust. When Sir Francis Drake passed by in 1586, Lane and his beleaguered settlers seized the chance to return to England, abandoning Roanoke's fragile foothold. Yet Raleigh remained undaunted. In 1587, determined to establish a permanent English presence, he dispatched another group of settlers led by John White, whose own daughter Eleanor Dare soon gave birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. This symbolized hope and a future rooted firmly in American soil. However, conditions soon deteriorated. Food shortages and strained relations with indigenous peoples persisted, compelling White to return to England for reinforcements and supplies. Promising to return swiftly, White left behind his family and the vulnerable colony, not knowing that war with Spain would delay his return for nearly 3 agonizing years. When White finally stepped ashore on Roanoke again in 1590, he was met with an eerie silence. The colony was deserted. The settlers vanished without trace. Only the cryptic word Croatoan, etched into a post, provided a faint clue to their fate. Despite frantic searching, no survivors were ever found, leaving the haunting mystery to echo through history. The fate of Roanoke, the lost colony, became a poignant cautionary tale, emblematic of the enormous risks and sacrifices inherent in colonial ambition. Raleigh's vision, though tragically unfulfilled, planted an enduring dream of English settlement in America. Roanoke's mysterious disappearance would forever symbolize both the promise and peril of the New World, inspiring future generations to unravel its enduring enigma. Part 6. The Riches of Guinea. The relentless equatorial sun blazed upon the shimmering waters of the Gulf of Guinea, where English ships first ventured with visions of wealth and trade. Captains, sailors, and merchants, drawn by stories of gold, ivory, and spices, braved treacherous seas to reach the distant, mysterious shores of West Africa. The early English voyages to Guinea began as cautious explorations, driven by curiosity and the promise of prosperity. Merchants such as William Towson and John Locke were among the first to navigate these uncharted waters in the 1550s. Their ships laden with European goods they hoped would entice local traders. The initial exchanges were cautious, marked by mutual suspicion and fascination, as Europeans encountered complex societies with their own rich histories and vibrant trading networks. Guinea's coastline teemed with opportunities and dangers in equal measure. Dense jungles and coastal villages offered glimpses of rich resources: gold dust gleaming in river sands, valuable ivory carried from the interior, and vibrant fabrics woven by skilled hands. Trade began tentatively but soon flourished, as English traders bartered cloth, metal tools, and firearms in exchange for valuable commodities. Yet these voyages were not without profound moral complexities and harsh realities. The lure of quick profits soon led to darker transactions: the slave trade. Initially small-scale, this commerce quickly grew, casting a long and troubling shadow over England's involvement in West Africa. English captains found themselves complicit in a trade that would alter countless lives and shape future centuries with tragic consequences. Amidst the complexity and moral ambiguity, genuine connections were occasionally forged. Early English traders documented local customs languages, and politics, recording observations that enriched European understanding of West African societies. Exchanges of knowledge and culture, though often strained by suspicion and exploitation, contributed to the earliest interactions between the two worlds. Despite numerous perils, including deadly diseases like malaria, treacherous navigation routes, and tense negotiations with local rulers, English ventures continued to push further along the Guinea coast. The pursuit of wealth and resources motivated these explorations, but they also sparked geopolitical rivalries as Portugal fiercely protected its dominance in West African waters. Ultimately, the voyages to Guinea marked England's expanding global presence, highlighting both the potential rewards and ethical challenges of exploration and trade. While the riches gained from these ventures significantly contributed to England's growing wealth and influence, the human cost remained a sobering reminder of the complicated legacy left by these early maritime enterprises. Part 7. Hawkins and the Slave Trade. The darkened horizon loomed ahead, waves thrashing fiercely against the sturdy hulls of John Hawkins's fleet. On board, shackled and confined, hundreds of African captives bore witness to a harrowing voyage, victims of a burgeoning trade in human lives. John Hawkins, a seasoned mariner whose name would be etched in history as both a pioneer and perpetrator, stood resolute on the deck, fully aware of the profitable yet morally repugnant enterprise in which he was engaged. Hawkins's initial venture into the slave trade began in 1562, driven by profit and encouraged by wealthy backers in England. Departing Plymouth, his small flotilla reached the West African coast, where negotiations swiftly turned into forced seizures, marking the brutal reality of the slave trade. Men, women, and children were taken from their homes, destined for distant shores they would never willingly see. Upon reaching the Spanish Caribbean, Hawkins exchanged his captives for precious commodities like sugar, hides, and pearls, fetching immense profits. News of his success sparked excitement and further investment back home, setting in motion subsequent expeditions that increasingly institutionalized English participation in the slave trade. Yet the voyages were perilous. The sea passage, later infamous as the Middle Passage, was marked by unimaginable suffering. Disease, starvation, and despair claimed many lives. Hawkins, driven by cold pragmatism, implemented measures to preserve human cargo not out of mercy, but economic necessity. His expeditions met further challenges upon arrival in the Americas. Initially welcomed by desperate colonists, Hawkins soon found Spanish authorities resistant to English incursions into their monopolized slave market. Conflicts erupted, most notably in 1568 at the Battle of San Juan de Ulua, where Hawkins's fleet was disastrously ambushed by the Spanish. This bloody confrontation underscored the high stakes of international rivalry and human trafficking. Back in England, Hawkins was received with mixed reactions. While his ventures significantly enriched investors and contributed to England's maritime expansion, the ethical implications were not lost on contemporaries. Criticism and moral unease simmered beneath public praise and economic celebrations, hinting at the profound human cost behind newfound wealth. John Hawkins's legacy remains deeply complex. His actions undeniably advanced England's maritime ambitions and economic might, yet they also set in motion centuries of suffering and exploitation, whose echoes reverberate through history. As England's role in the Atlantic slave trade expanded, Hawkins's name became emblematic of both entrepreneurial spirit and moral blindness, forever entwined in the tragic fabric of human history. Part 8. Newfoundland's Cold Shores. The rugged coastline of Newfoundland rose starkly from the icy waters, its jagged cliffs shrouded in mist and battered by relentless waves. English fishing vessels bobbed upon turbulent seas, their crews battling bitter winds and freezing spray, driven by the promise of wealth in the form of abundant codfish. The English voyages to Newfoundland began as modest expeditions in the early 1500s, but swiftly expanded, drawn by tales of fish so plentiful they could be scooped up by the basketful. Fishermen, hardened by difficult lives at sea, departed ports like Bristol, Plymouth, and London each spring, embarking upon perilous journeys across the tempestuous North Atlantic. Once arrived, crews established temporary fishing settlements along Newfoundland's harsh shores, quickly constructing wooden stages for drying cod, rudimentary huts for shelter, and wharves to anchor their vessels. Life in these seasonal colonies was arduous and unforgiving. Long days spent hauling nets and cleaning fish, punctuated by fierce storms and the ever-present risk of shipwreck. Yet despite the hardships, the fisheries thrived. Newfoundland cod, prized across Europe, became a cornerstone of England's maritime economy, fueling trade and securing the livelihoods of countless families back home. The fisheries represented one of England's earliest and most sustained ventures into overseas trade, laying essential foundations for future colonial enterprises. Encounters with indigenous peoples, particularly the Beothuk, added layers of complexity to the Newfoundland experience. Initially marked by curiosity and cautious interaction, these relationships often deteriorated into conflict and misunderstanding. Competition over resources and differing worldviews led to strained relations and tragic outcomes, highlighting the difficult realities of cross-cultural contact during this era. Each autumn, vessels laden with preserved codfish sailed back across the Atlantic, their crews weary but triumphant, bringing profits that financed future voyages and bolstered England's growing maritime presence. Yet the seas remained unforgiving, each successful return voyage shadowed by memories of lost comrades and sunken ships claimed by the North Atlantic's fury. Newfoundland's cold shores thus embodied both opportunity and peril, symbolizing England's relentless pursuit of wealth and influence amid harsh realities. These early fishing expeditions, often overlooked compared to more glamorous explorations, nevertheless played a crucial role in expanding England's horizons, revealing the stark determination and resilience required to navigate and exploit distant, unforgiving lands. Part 9. The Muscovy Company, Route to Russia. Across icy northern seas and through perilous Arctic conditions, English explorers charted a daring course toward distant Russia, propelled by hopes of trade and diplomatic alliances. These pioneering voyages, initiated by the newly formed Muscovy Company in 1553, marked England's bold entry into a remote, unknown region, shaping the nation's international aspirations and its maritime identity. The venture began under the command of Hugh Willoughby and Richard Chancellor, setting sail from London with ambitious instructions to discover a northeastern passage to the riches of Asia. Yet tragedy struck swiftly. Willoughby's ships became trapped in Arctic ice, their crews succumbing to freezing temperatures and starvation, leaving Chancellor alone to carry forth the mission. Chancellor, a courageous and determined navigator, persevered through storms and uncertainties, eventually landing on the shores of Russia's White Sea. He journeyed inland, encountering the court of Tsar Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, in Moscow. Chancellor's diplomatic skill and mutual curiosity led to an unprecedented trade agreement, marking the beginning of direct English-Russian relations. The Muscovy Company flourished, monopolizing trade with Russia and navigating challenging Arctic waters regularly. The journeys were fraught with danger. Ships battled violent storms, treacherous icebergs, and the constant threat of shipwreck. Sailors endured harsh conditions and extreme cold, displaying extraordinary resilience driven by the lucrative rewards of trade in fur, timber, hemp, and exotic goods from the East. The company also facilitated cultural and diplomatic exchanges. English merchants established trading posts in Russian cities, fostering mutual curiosity, knowledge exchange, and diplomatic engagement. These interactions profoundly influenced England's international outlook, paving the way for future global commerce and exploration. Yet, the relationship between England and Russia was far from simple. Negotiations were often complex, marked by shifting alliances, political intrigues, and mutual mistrust. Tsar Ivan's mercurial temperament complicated dealings, requiring English diplomats and traders to navigate carefully between diplomacy and commerce. Despite challenges, the Muscovy Company's ventures significantly expanded England's maritime horizons. Their expeditions offered critical insights into Arctic navigation, geography, and the realities of long-distance maritime trade. Furthermore, the routes established by Chancellor and his successors underscored England's capability and ambition in exploring and exploiting the far reaches of the known world. Ultimately, the Muscovy Company's daring voyages laid the groundwork for England's global aspirations, highlighting both the immense potential and inherent dangers of exploring unknown seas. Their efforts symbolized the audacity and adventurous spirit that defined England's emerging maritime identity. Part 10. A Passage East, the Levant Company. The age of exploration had ignited a fire in the hearts of England's traders, sailors, and adventurers. Yet, as much as the English sought to claim new lands across the vast Atlantic, there were equally rich opportunities closer to home, across the turbulent waters of the Mediterranean. There, nestled between East and West, lay a world of untold riches, ancient trade routes, and powerful empires. And it was in this fertile, chaotic landscape that the Levant Company would carve its place. The story of England's early ventures into the Levant, the region encompassing the eastern Mediterranean and parts of the Middle East, began in the wake of the Turkish Empire's expansion. England's attempts to navigate the complex political and commercial relationships with the Ottoman Empire became one of the most compelling chapters in Hakluyt's compilation of Voyages. The Levant offered treasures of silk, spices, and the rarest of goods, but it was also a dangerous and strategically important region. The Ottoman Empire, with its dominance over trade routes, often made it difficult for foreign nations to gain a foothold in the region. Nevertheless, English merchants, hungry for profit and motivated by the growing ambition of Elizabeth III's court, were undeterred. In the 1570s, a group of enterprising Englishmen, led by figures such as the merchant and explorer Richard Staper, sought to bypass the monopoly of the Venetians, Genoese, and other Mediterranean powers. They sought an alternative route to the riches of the Levant and pushed for the establishment of direct trade links with the Ottoman territories, which would allow them to bypass the heavily controlled overland routes and bring spices, textiles, and other luxury goods to England at a much higher profit margin. What followed was a series of perilous voyages. For years, English ships ventured out into the Mediterranean, risking storms, piracy, and the ever-present threat of Ottoman interception. But their persistence paid off, and in 1581, Queen Elizabeth I granted the group a royal charter, establishing the Levant Company. This company would soon become England's primary means of engaging in trade with the Ottoman Empire and the surrounding regions, marking a shift in the balance of power on the high seas. The Levant Company, a powerful symbol of Elizabethan commercial ambition, would later act as a gateway for English influence in the East. It also represented the convergence of exploration, diplomacy, and economics. Merchants became diplomats, sailors became traders, and England began to weave itself into the complex tapestry of Mediterranean and Middle Eastern politics. As the first ships departed the shores of England to establish these new trading routes, the promise of a lucrative and strategic alliance with the Ottoman Empire seemed within reach. However, the challenges were as monumental as the rewards. The English faced not only competition from other European powers, but also the formidable might of the Ottoman navy. Yet, the determination of English merchants and the royal backing of Queen Elizabeth would ensure that the Levant Company flourished, bringing England closer to the riches and political clout of the East. Through Hakluyt's vivid recounting, we are transported into this world of high-stakes negotiation, political maneuvering, and the ever-present risk of failure. The stories of these voyages, filled with adventure and peril, capture the essence of the Elizabethan spirit, the drive for expansion and wealth, coupled with an unshakable belief in England's destiny to dominate the seas and establish trade empires across the globe. Part 11. Drake's Assault on Cadiz. The year was 1587, and Sir Francis Drake, the Sea Dragon of England, had already earned a reputation as one of the most daring and accomplished sailors in the world. His exploits in circumnavigating the globe, his destruction of Spanish treasure fleets, and his unrelenting pursuit of English naval superiority had made him a hero to many. Yet, his most audacious act was still to come, an act that would reverberate across the seas and shake the foundations of Spanish power. The Spanish Empire, under King Philip II, had been growing in strength for decades. It had accumulated vast wealth from its colonies in the Americas and had built an unprecedented fleet, the Invincible Armada, with the aim of conquering England. The tensions between the two nations were at a boiling point, with religious conflict, territorial disputes, and the looming threat of invasion from Spain. In this climate of uncertainty, Drake, ever the opportunist, saw an opening. With the Spanish fleet docked in Cadiz, a crucial port on Spain's southwestern coast, he saw a chance to cripple his enemy before the Armada could set sail. The port was heavily fortified, but Drake's experience in striking swift, hard blows made him believe that a calculated attack could achieve devastating results. In April of 1587, Drake set out with a fleet of 30 ships. His goal was not only to raid Cadiz, but also to destroy the Spanish fleet before it could leave port. He sailed under the cover of night, navigating past enemy defences with remarkable stealth. By morning, his ships had arrived at Cadiz, and an assault unlike any other was about to unfold. The battle that followed was a masterpiece of strategy. Drake's forces landed swiftly, catching the Spanish off guard. His men, a combination of seasoned sailors and soldiers, launched a raid on the port's defences. They seized supplies, burned ships, and destroyed any vessels they could find, all while facing fierce resistance from Spanish soldiers. The damage to the Spanish fleet was severe. Drake's forces disabled or destroyed over 30 ships in the harbour, setting back Spain's naval ambitions by months, if not years. The destruction of the fleet, combined with the subsequent loss of crucial resources, dealt a crushing blow to Spain's plans to invade England. Drake's raid on Cadiz became a celebrated victory in England. It was a blow to Spain's pride and a rallying cry for the English nation. Not only had Drake struck a devastating blow to Spain's naval power, But he had also sent a powerful message that England would not back down in the face of Spanish aggression. The raid gave England time to regroup and prepare for the Spanish Armada, which would set sail the following year. The raid on Cadiz, in its swift execution and decisive impact, epitomized Drake's genius as a naval commander. It was a daring and unorthodox move, an act of defiance that disrupted the plans of one of the world's most powerful empires. In the years that followed, it became a cornerstone of English naval legend and was a key moment in the larger struggle between England and Spain. As Hakluyt recounts, the success of Drake's assault on Cadiz was not just about military victory. It was a symbol of England's resolve, its willingness to strike at the heart of its enemies, and its emerging dominance on the world stage. This bold strike set the stage for what would become one of the most famous naval battles in history, the clash between the Spanish Armada and the English fleet. Part 12. The Spanish Armada. The summer of 1588 was one of high tension and mounting anticipation. For years, King Philip II of Spain had been preparing to crush England's growing maritime power. England's defiance, particularly under the leadership of Queen Elizabeth I, had angered the Spanish monarch. The pirate raids of Sir Francis Drake, the English interference with Spanish treasure fleets, and the Protestant zealotry that threatened Catholic orthodoxy all culminated in a single moment of confrontation. Spain's response to this threat was the creation of the Invincible Armada, a fleet of 130 ships, more than twice the size of any English fleet, manned by 30,000 sailors, soldiers, and support staff. The Armada's mission was clear: to sail from Spain, conquer England, and restore Catholic rule under Philip II. The stakes could not have been higher. If the Spanish succeeded, England's Protestantism would be crushed, its sea power destroyed, and its sovereignty extinguished. The English, however, were not prepared to yield. Queen Elizabeth I, an astute and calculated ruler, knew the consequences of failure. The crown was heavily reliant on naval supremacy, and if Spain succeeded, England's very existence would be threatened. Under the guidance of Lord Charles Howard and Sir Francis Drake, England's navy took shape in a defensive posture, ready to meet the mighty Spanish fleet with a strategy built on agility, knowledge of the seas, and determination. As the Spanish fleet began its voyage up the English Channel, it was met by England's smaller but more nimble fleet. The English ships, though fewer in number, were faster and better suited to hit-and-run tactics. They were also familiar with the treacherous waters of the Channel, an advantage the Spanish did not possess. As the Armada approached the English coast, the first skirmishes began. English ships launched attacks against the Spanish fleet, disrupting its formation and causing damage to several ships. The Armada, intending to land its forces in England, faced a series of challenges. The weather played a key role. Fierce storms scattered the Spanish ships, making them vulnerable to English assaults. Sir Francis Drake's raids, especially his raid on Cadiz the previous year, had already severely weakened Spain's navy, and now, in the face of a full-scale confrontation, Spain's slow-moving, heavily armed galleons struggled against the quicker, more maneuverable English vessels. The battle intensified off the coast of Gravelines, in the Channel. For several days, the two fleets clashed. The English navy, employing a strategy of aggressive harrying, struck at the Armada with swarms of smaller, faster ships. The Spanish, unable to break the English encirclement, were forced into a retreat. The English navy's superior tactics, combined with the unpredictable weather, turned the tide against the Spanish. But the Armada's troubles were far from over. With the retreat, the Spanish fleet attempted to sail north around Scotland, hoping to return to Spain by a different route. What followed was a catastrophic series of events. The fleet encountered fierce storms, and many of the remaining ships were destroyed or forced to run aground along the coasts of Ireland and Scotland. By the time the Armada returned to Spain, less than half of its ships had survived the ordeal. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was not just a victory for the English Navy. It was a momentous event that shifted the balance of power in Europe. It marked the beginning of the decline of Spanish maritime supremacy and the rise of England as a dominant naval force. The news of the victory was celebrated throughout England, and Queen Elizabeth I's leadership was lauded as pivotal in protecting the nation's independence and Protestant faith. In Hakluyt's account, the defeat of the Armada is framed as a triumph of strategy and tenacity, highlighting the importance of leadership, preparedness, and knowledge of the sea. The victory was a defining moment in England's rise to maritime dominance and laid the groundwork for its later imperial ventures. The Spanish Armada, for all its might and grandeur, was ultimately undone by the swiftness and daring of the English fleet. This battle, one of the most famous in naval history, would be remembered not only for its immediate military success, but also for the long-term consequences it had on European geopolitics. Spain's failure to invade England solidified England's position as a naval power and set the stage for its eventual colonial expansion in the Americas and beyond. Part 13. John Davis and the Quest for the Northwest Passage. The quest for the Northwest Passage, a fabled route through the Arctic that would connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, captivated the imaginations of explorers for centuries. To find this shortcut to the riches of the East was to unlock a new era of trade, exploration, and glory. For England, the challenge was daunting. No one had yet succeeded in navigating these frozen waters, and many believed the passage to be nothing more than myth. Yet, for one man, John Davis, the lure of the passage would prove irresistible. John Davis, a seasoned mariner with a sharp mind for navigation, was driven by a deep, almost obsessive desire to chart the unknown waters of the North. As a man of the sea, he was no stranger to the hazards of exploration. The Arctic was a realm of ice, bitter cold, and uncertainty, but Davis's relentless determination to find the Northwest Passage became one of the defining missions of his career. In 1585, with the support of wealthy backers and the blessing of Queen Elizabeth I, Davis set sail on his first expedition to the northern seas. His ships were small, but his ambition was vast. Davis and his crew journeyed into the icy waters above the Arctic Circle, a region that had repelled many explorers before him. The weather was brutal, the days long, and the nights unrelenting, but Davis pressed on, hoping that the fabled passage lay just beyond the horizon. The journey was fraught with danger. Ice floes blocked their way, forcing Davis to change course and navigate treacherous waters with little more than a rudimentary understanding of the polar seas. Yet, through sheer perseverance, Davis discovered new lands and waterways, mapping parts of what is now Greenland and the Canadian Arctic. He sailed along the coasts of Labrador and Baffin Island, offering some of the first detailed accounts of the Arctic's geography. Though he did not find the elusive passage, Davis's efforts were not in vain. He returned to England with valuable information and a renewed determination to try again. Davis made several more attempts to find the Northwest Passage, each journey revealing more of the frozen world, but still failing to connect the Atlantic to the Pacific. His expeditions were arduous, and the men he commanded faced extreme conditions. cold so bitter it froze their provisions and ice so thick it rendered their ships immobile. Yet, through all the hardship, Davis's voyages expanded England's understanding of the Arctic, and his charts became essential for future explorers. His most important contribution, however, was his development of a navigational tool that would prove invaluable to future Arctic explorers, the Davis Quadrant. This instrument allowed sailors to measure the altitude of celestial bodies, giving them a more accurate means of determining their latitude. The quadrant was a critical advancement for explorers attempting to navigate the harsh, featureless expanse of the Arctic, and its influence would be felt long after Davis's death. The legacy of Davis's expeditions was complex. Though he never succeeded in finding the Northwest Passage, his contributions to maritime exploration were profound. His journeys opened up the northern seas to future explorers, and his navigational innovations helped lay the groundwork for England's subsequent success in the Arctic and beyond. Hakluyt's account of Davis's voyages is a testament to the spirit of exploration that defined the Elizabethan age. Davis's persistence in the face of overwhelming adversity embodied the ambitious and daring nature of English exploration. His voyages may have failed to find the passage, but they succeeded in showing that England was a nation capable of taking on the impossible. Through Davis's efforts, the English would gain a foothold in the Arctic, and his spirit of adventure would inspire generations of sailors to seek out the unknown. In the end, it was not just the discovery of a passage that defined Davis's legacy, but his contribution to the larger goal of expanding the English maritime empire. His work added to the growing body of knowledge that would eventually propel England to new frontiers, not just in the Arctic, but in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. His voyages, though not crowned with the success of the Northwest Passage, laid the foundation for the future of English exploration and maritime dominance. Part 14. Trading with the Indies. In the late 16th century, the search for new trade routes to the east was one of the driving forces behind England's maritime ambitions. The riches of the east, silks, spices, and precious gems, were in high demand across Europe. Yet, the traditional trading routes were controlled by the Portuguese and Spanish, who had established powerful monopolies over the spice trade and access to the Orient. England, however, eager to challenge this monopoly and establish its own foothold in the lucrative markets of Asia, set its sights on finding an alternative route. The answer lay in the fabled Indies, the lands of India, Southeast Asia, and the Far East, where vast fortunes were to be made. English merchants and sailors began to look beyond Europe towards the unknown waters of the Indian Ocean. The establishment of direct trade routes with the Indies would not only open new avenues for wealth, but also allow England to position itself as a major player in the global trade network. The first English attempts to engage in trade with the Indies were fraught with challenges. The Portuguese held a powerful grip on the sea routes to India, and their military presence in the region was formidable. Yet, the English were undeterred. Encouraged by the success of earlier voyages, particularly those of Sir Francis Drake, who had already demonstrated that England could challenge the Spanish and Portuguese navies, English merchants began to organize their own expeditions to the east. In 1591, the English set out to establish a trading presence in the east under the auspices of the newly formed East India Company, a trading consortium designed to compete with Portuguese and Spanish monopolies. The company's goal was simple: to find a new route to the Spice Islands of the East and secure a share of the immense wealth that flowed through the region. The first English ships sailed towards the Indies with high hopes, but faced immediate obstacles. The Portuguese fleet, intent on defending its monopoly, sought to intercept the English ships, and the waters of the Indian Ocean were filled with the threats of piracy, unfamiliar territories, and rough seas. Yet, the English proved resilient. They battled Portuguese ships, fought off pirates, and navigated treacherous waters in search of the rich ports of India and beyond. The journey was arduous. Along the way, English ships were forced to navigate through dangerous waters, often relying on their superior navigational skills to find their way. The ships carried not only the hopes of the merchants, but also the aspirations of a nation eager to expand its influence across the globe. After months of hard travel, the English finally reached the ports of India. There, they established the first English trading post in Surat, a bustling centre of commerce on the western coast of India. The riches of the East were now within reach: spices, silks, and precious metals, all of which could be transported back to England at a staggering profit. However, this success did not come without its own set of challenges. The English were newcomers to the region, and their presence was not welcomed by the Portuguese, who viewed the intrusion as a direct threat to their dominance. Tensions between the English and Portuguese boiled over, and the English found themselves embroiled in both trade disputes and military skirmishes. The Portuguese fleet continued to patrol the seas, attempting to block English trade and prevent their expansion in the region. Despite these challenges, the East India Company was able to secure lucrative contracts with Indian rulers and merchants. The English gradually established a foothold in the region, opening up new trade routes and securing valuable goods. This marked the beginning of what would eventually become one of the most profitable and influential ventures in English history: the establishment of the English East India Company, which would dominate trade in the region for centuries. Hakluyt's account of these early voyages is rich with the details of English ambition and perseverance. The quest to trade with the Indies marked a pivotal moment in England's rise as a global power. It was a bold, high-stakes venture that would change the course of history, bringing immense wealth to England and establishing a trade network that would shape the world for generations to come. Through the voyages of the early East India Company, England's influence in the East began to grow, leading to the eventual colonization of India and the establishment of an empire that would span continents. The stories of these early explorers and merchants are a testament to the spirit of adventure, the drive for wealth, and the ambition to carve out a place in the world. Part 15. The Legacy of English Exploration. The pages of Richard Hakluyt's Principal Voyages of the English Nation tell a story of risk, reward, and transformation. The voyages chronicled within the tome had far-reaching consequences, not just for the explorers themselves, but for the entire nation of England. As the winds of time carried the English beyond their island shores, they encountered uncharted lands, unimaginable wealth, and complex civilizations. Yet, even more significant than the riches they brought back were the far-reaching changes that these voyages set in motion. Changes that would shape the future of both England and the world. England's maritime exploits, as Hakluyt so passionately documented, were the seed of what would become one of the most powerful empires in history. The sailors and explorers of the 16th century were not just driven by a thirst for adventure or a desire to chart unknown lands. They were driven by a vision of power, wealth, and influence. Their voyages into the unknown paved the way for an empire that would span the globe, one built upon naval dominance, trade, and colonial expansion. By the end of the century, England had secured its place as a dominant maritime power. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 was a defining moment, marking the rise of England as a rival to Spain's once unquestioned supremacy on the seas. The victories and explorations chronicled by Hakluyt were not isolated incidents. They were part of a broader narrative of national ambition, where the quest for new lands and wealth went hand in hand with the establishment of global influence. But England's exploration and expansion were not without their darker side. The English, like many of their European counterparts, engaged in the transatlantic slave trade, exploited indigenous populations, and laid the foundations for colonial systems that would create deep imbalances of power and wealth. These voyages were not simply about discovery. They were about domination, control, and the construction of a new world order, one where English influence would stretch from the Americas to Africa, India, and beyond. The creation of the East India Company, the establishment of colonies in the Americas, and the opening of new trade routes were all part of a larger plan to transform England from a relatively small European power into a global empire. The wealth brought in from these ventures fueled the English economy, led to the development of powerful industries, and supported a growing merchant class. It also helped to fund England's naval supremacy, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of exploration and empire building that would continue for centuries. However, the legacy of English exploration is not just one of empire building and trade. It is also one of intellectual and cultural exchange. The voyages of exploration opened up new worlds of knowledge and possibility. English scientists, philosophers, and writers were inspired by the new lands and peoples they encountered, fueling the development of the Enlightenment and contributing to the intellectual revolution of the 17th and 18th centuries. The writings of explorers like Hakluyt would become crucial sources for later generations, helping to shape the development of geography, anthropology, and even literature. Yet, Hakluyt's work reminds us that exploration was not just about the individuals who embarked on these voyages. It was about the collective ambition of an entire nation. Through his meticulous documentation of these voyages, he immortalized the spirit of England's explorers, their courage, their curiosity, and their relentless pursuit of the unknown. As Hakluyt's compendium spread across England and the world, it inspired generations of adventurers and explorers. The pages of his book were more than just records of past journeys. They were blueprints for future endeavors. The voyages he chronicled were just the beginning of a larger narrative, one that would take England to the farthest corners of the earth, to places where its influence would be felt for centuries to come. In the end, the legacy of English exploration is a complex one. It is a story of both triumph and tragedy, of remarkable achievement and profound consequences. The voyages that Hakluyt so carefully documented set the stage for England's emergence as a global power, but they also laid the groundwork for the inequalities and injustices that would define much of the world's modern history. Through Hakluyt's writings, we are reminded that the history of exploration is not just the history of the explorers themselves, but of the nations that sent them and the worlds they encountered. It is a legacy that shaped the course of history, for better or worse, and continues to shape the world we live in today.